everybody. Welcome to the Retro Wrestling Review Podcast, where we watch and review old school retro pro wrestling. First project will be USWA Championship Wrestling from 1993. I'm your host, Gene Jackson, and I want to welcome my esteemed co-host. You may know him from P3 Radio, Richard Mullikan and Josh Briley. Guys, how are you doing today?
Hey, doing great. This is weird being on video. I'm trying not to look at myself.
Yeah, and everybody will see me reading the format here, so that's kind of weird all the way around. But we're trying something new, as far as how we're doing this. Old school wrestling is not new to any of us. I just want to say on the front end here, we're all wrestling fans, especially Memphis wrestling fans. You guys, if you want to, before we get started, just for a little bit of context here to kind of give your connection, both of you guys, to Memphis wrestling, or kind of describe your fandom to people, kind of let people know where you're coming from here.
Yep. So I grew up with professional wrestling on every Saturday. We would watch Memphis. We would watch everything to the point where I got into the business, when I got old enough to wrestle. So 18 years old, I was in the crew of guys that was on the CW30 with Memphis Wrestling. So met a lot of guys there. So a lot of these people were also in my life because of Josh, who Josh can tell his side of the story, but we were pretty much raised with Memphis Wrestling, like kind of in our DNA.
Yeah, man. So my uncle is Nightmare Danny Davis. And so a lot of times, I grew up a lot, like Richard was my grandmother's neighbor. So, a lot of times my uncle, he would come, because we live in Jackson, Tennessee, which is the midway point between Memphis and Nashville. So a lot of times he would stop in, on the road or whatever, and Cody Michaels might be with him, or Joey Maggs might be with him, or just name whoever, and they might be with him. And my granny, she made gear for a lot of guys. So always having wrestlers over and stuff, always wrestling, always playing wrestling. Yeah. It's always been there.
It was always cool to look over across the street and see, like, talking to my grandmother, I'm like, that's Jeff Jarrett. Jeff Jarrett just got out of that car. That's Honky Tonk Man. What's Honky Tonk Man doing over there? And then she would make us tights. Like, we have pictures of like us when we were running around like our neighborhood, looking like crazy people in like lime green masks and tights. And Josh is like, these were made for Eric Embry. And it's like
he didn't like them, so we got them now.
So he's wearing like the low cut, like boxer brief, like singlets, just out in the middle of Bemis, in a little subdivision. So, but it was really cool. Like I said, it was like we were just ingrained into Memphis wrestling just because of Mr. Uncle Danny,
right?
As we call him on P3 Radio, Mr. Uncle Danny. But we'd go through all of his crap. Like, we'd go through his closet.
At one point, I brought the global light heavyweight title over to Richard's house, and we had a fucking match for it. It was really cool.
So, yeah, wrestling's just been a part of our lives all through our whole lives. So
that's awesome. I mean, as a kid, I was a huge fan of the Nightmares, like in Continental and in Memphis, but mostly in Continentals. That's where I was able to go see them, like in Columbus, Mississippi. So I was a huge Nightmare Danny Davis fan. So once I found out that, Josh was his nephew, I've been a big mark for that ever since I've heard that. So maybe, who knows, maybe at some point you might can, once we get this thing going and show people we're serious about it, maybe you can, twist his arm and get him to make an appearance on here or something.
I'll try my damn
best. Or something.
He's loving Florida though. He's loving relaxing and stuff.
But that's cool, man. I'm glad to have you guys. Were the first guys I thought of, when I decided to do this. And so I immediately reached out, and I was tickled when you guys agreed to do it. So we're going to get started here. But, so today's episode, we're going to be talking about the January 2nd, 1993 episode of USWA. But I feel like to properly do that, for context, we got to kind of take a step back and talk about the December 26th, 1992 episode of USWA. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. We're going to just run through the gist of what took place. So on that episode, we saw Madman Pondo. Yes, that Madman Pondo. For people who know, the hardcore wrestler. He went down to USWA Southern Champion Jeff Jarrett in a non-title match. We saw the tag team of Mr. Clyde and Mr. Paradise face the team of Superstar Bill Dundee and Nightmare Danny Davis. and I think you can all guess how that played out. And then we saw Miss Creature with Burt Prentice get the best of Ricky Hayes, and then in promo-wise, we saw a long segment where Brian Christopher offers up other people's hair, managers who he referred to as valets at the time, even though they were all male. First, Brian offered up Burt Prentice's hair against Jeff Jarrett's USWA Southern title. Burt refused, and ultimately he decided to separate himself from Brian, and he left. So Brian then put up Mike Sample's hair against Jeff Jarrett's USWA Southern title, and eventually Mike Samples quit. So then Brian offered up Mr. Clyde, who was an enhancement guy there for the USWA. And some of these people we're going to go back and talk about a little more in depth later on as we go through the series here. But today's show could be a little long since we're kind of sort of talking about two shows. We're not going to dig too deep. But Mr. Clyde declined as well. So finally we landed on Zeke Rivers was the lucky fellow who got his hair on the line against against Jeff Jarrett's title on behalf of Brian Christopher. And we'll have a little more of that on later in the episode. Then Burt Prentice come out and continued to push his narrative at the time that Miss Texas was not really a woman. She was actually a man named Bubba Johnson, of all things. And over the course of these podcasts, we'll encounter quite a few of these angles that probably wouldn't fly in 2024. This being a prime example of that, but we'll talk about those later on. And then Nightmare Danny Davis, who got a face full of ether earlier in the program from the Masters of Terror, comes out with Bill Dundee and demands a tag team match with a crazy stipulation that apparently he saw it at some point, but he hasn't actually been in one or seen it. He just knows it's called something like an Oriental death match, he said. He spends a couple of minutes describing it. We'll wait till we end up covering 1992 at some point to really get into what those stipulations were, but it sounded pretty wild. But it was something like an Oriental death match, according to Uncle Danny. And then after a painful segment that saw Richard Lee playing guitar and singing along to a song with Moondog Spot, they bring out all the participants for the Moondog Battle Royal that's going to be coming up that Monday night. They all come out and draw their numbers, so apparently this was going to be a Moondog Rumble more than just a Moondog Battle Royal. And then Lawler comes out with a fireworks assortment from Fireworks City that will be given away on Monday night since we're right there at New Year's. He then does a promo for Monday night, letting everyone know the winner of the Moondog Battle Royal will get $10,000. He also plugs his world title versus mask match that he's going to have against the Christmas Creature, who he teases and insinuates is someone from the WWF. While the week prior to this, he had flat out said that it was Sid from WWF. It wasn't. And then in the main event of the program, the Bruise Brothers, Ron and Don Harris with Burt Prentice, took on USWA Southern Champion Jeff Jarrett and his partner, the Unified World Champion Jerry the King Lawler, in a match that shockingly ended in a disqualification, guys, when Brian Christopher and the Christmas Creature ran in. And eventually, we also saw the Moondogs come in, Dundee and Davis, the Masters of Terror, et cetera, and the show ended in turmoil leading in to that Monday's card. Any comments y'all want to make on that episode from anything you heard there?
I don't know if you saw it, but you said Christmas Creature, and I did this right here and came back down. Man, I listening back to this, I was always, we were always too poor to get to Memphis to see any of these, but watching these shows back, like it just dawned on me, like how much I wanted to just go every week. It didn't matter who was there or who was involved. I just wanted to be there, but never could get there. And then just listening back to some of these names like Mr. Clyde and the Masters of Terror, it's like those guys are smart. They have a master's degree in terror. And Mr. Clyde, like some of these names that I hadn't thought about in years.
He looked good, though. He was a
looked
big guy.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like Mr. Clyde was his name. It's almost like he runs a daycare,
I just think about the fact that I got involved in wrestling in like 97 and spent a few years. I remember that I labored over what my name was going to be for weeks and months. Right. And back and forth and back and forth and talking to friends. And it's like, how long do you think it took him to come up with Mr. Clyde? And that's what we landed on. So what were the losers of that contest?
Had to be some stinkers.
But I think what I was getting at there was just the fact that even though some of the names now, as we're older, seem a little like cheesy. I mean, back then you couldn't have told me these guys weren't like the best in the world. And it's still like, it's a nostalgia feel when you read off some of those names and some of those matches, like where I was and how I felt about them as a kid. Like, it was just awesome. It was awesome to see.
You think about it though, a lot of times, at least me, and I know you specifically, but you'd have those arguments at school about wrestling's fake. And at that point in time, I'm 11. I'm still in it. I'm like, no, it's not. They're really hitting each other. They're really hurting each other. And then you have to defend the Christmas creature.
Right.
You know what I mean? Right. It's a hard battle.
Yeah.
But I loved it so much as a kid. And that added a lot of color to the black and white. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Exactly. And we're going to come back to the Christmas creature here in a moment, because right now we're going to head over to the Coliseum. This is what went down on December 28th, 1992 at the Mid-South Coliseum. They drew 3,500 people for this card.
Wow.
Remember that number. It'll be important later on. In the opening match, we saw Burt Prentice and Leslie Ballinger beat Miss Texas and Eddie Marlin. What a tag team match that must have been. Then, in the second match, we saw Bill Dundee and Danny Davis beat the Masters of Terror in an Oriental death match. Third match on the card saw the USWA Southern Heavyweight Champion Jeff Jarrett pin Brian Christopher in a title versus Zeke Rivers hair match, resulting in Brian's manager Zeke Rivers having his head shaved. And we'll see a little bit of that later in this program. Then the Bruise Brothers, Ron and Don Harris, beat the Moondogs, Spot and Spike, to win the USWA Tag Team Championships. And then in the main event, the USWA Unified World Champ, Jerry the King Lawler, pinned the Christmas Creature. And, of course, the Christmas Creature was revealed to be Glenn Jacobs, a.k.a. Kane, although it was said many of the fans had presumed that the Christmas Creature was Brian Lee. And Lawler, who had also insinuated it was Sid. However, when the creature was unmasked, most people didn't even get a good look at Jacobs because he got out of there. So most people left there that night having no idea that Christmas Creature was the future Isaac Yankem. And even further in the future, Kane, Doomsday, take your pick. But looking back from, 2024, if you came back in a time machine and someone said, hey, guys, the Christmas Creature that you just saw on TV today, would you find it more shocking to learn that he would in the future become the Undertaker's brother Kane, or that he would become the mayor of Knoxville?
Now I could see him being worked into being Kane's brother or Undertaker's brother, right. But it seemed almost like Back to the Future-esque that he's the mayor now. You know what I mean? It's just like, that would never happen. That would never happen. It's going to be somebody else, but he's apparently doing pretty good over that way.
Exactly. And while he may have had an unfair advantage, Moondog Spike won the Moondog Battle Royal, which was basically just a Royal Rumble with weapons involved. So, that definitely plays into the favor of the Moondogs. All right. So with all that, summing up what took place the week before, that brings us to the January 2nd, 1993 episode. So let's get into it. Dave opened the show by letting us know that Corey Macklin is unfortunately on vacation this week and won't be joining us today, and that we'll be hearing from the superstar Bill Dundee. Let's take a listen real quick to what Dave had to say about that.
Well, as I told you, we had a special announcement to make about Bill Dundee. This is kind of a happy and sad day together regarding that, because there aren't many living legends in anything. But when it comes to wrestling, one of them for sure is the superstar Bill Dundee. Every USWA fan and fans all over the United States and the world know about Bill Dundee and the great career. Bill has decided to make a career change. He has decided to accept an executive position with another wrestling organization, with the WCW. And as a result, he has decided he wants to say farewell in style to all the fans in the USWA, and has decided on a farewell tour. More about that in a moment. Right now, just take a look at some of the highlights of the superstar, Bill Dundee.
All right, so we're not going to take a look at the highlights of the superstar because that music will get us kicked off of YouTube or wherever you're watching this. The video actually, when I put the video up on YouTube, they had that old song "Memories" playing in the background, and they actually muted that on YouTube. And I think they might have done us all a favor.
Oh yeah.
Now, before you guys comment on what this announcement is that he just alluded to, let's quickly hear what the superstar has to say about it.
Here he is, right here. You're looking at him perhaps for the last time on USWA Championship Wrestling. As again, in case you joined us a couple of minutes late, Bill's accepted an executive position with another wrestling organization. And Bill, I'm happy for you. Congratulations on the new position. But gosh, going to miss seeing you around here.
Well, Dave, I appreciate the kind words. And for the last 20 years, I've been here every Saturday morning. And, I've been thinking about this all week, and it didn't seem real hard when I was thinking about it, but it's awful hard to say it. The wrestling fans, without the wrestling fans, there ain't no wrestling, so let's not mistake that. But to become more than that after 20 years, it's like, little guys this big now, they're this big. Man, I've been watching you all my life, Well, that's true. 20 years I've been around here, and you get to love the people. I know a lot of them love me, some may, some not, but most of them do. And I've had a good rapport with all the fans, and I just want to take this opportunity, and I talked to Eddie Martin. I said, hey, man, book me everywhere this week where USWA is going to go, because I personally want to say goodbye. So I'm going to go down to WCW and see what happens down there. I don't know. Probably have to wear a suit and a tie. I don't know. But anyway, when I climb in this ring today for this TV match today, this is the last time it's going to be here. And then all week long, I'm going to be around where USWA is. And I just want to say goodbye to everybody personally. Dave, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Bill. It's been great watching you all this time in the ring there.
Now, in retrospect, to think that in 1993 that Dave and Bill was telling us this was going to be the last time we would see Bill Dundee in the studio here at TV5, it didn't exactly play out that way. What do you guys think of it?
It didn't last long, that's for sure.
I was telling Josh, and I'm not trying to poke fun or anything. I don't know if it's the video quality because it's so old, but when he came out, those tights were almost flesh colored, and I thought he was Donald Duck in it. For like a good 2 minutes, I'm like, okay, it's his last time, and he's going out with a bang. And I couldn't get past the interview where he's just sitting there talking, and it just looks like he's wearing a jacket and no pants. But with that said, as a kid, I remember when this happened, and I remember feeling sad because Dundee had been a part of our lives my whole life,
And the way they're announcing it too, he's taking an executive position, so that would indicate that he's not going to be a wrestler anymore after this farewell tour. So yeah, it was like a moment of just because Bill's not going to be there anymore.
Yeah, and Bill's stepping out of the ring, and we figured back then, like, well, it's probably time, and I think that was the intent. Honestly, he did. A couple of people that I've talked to have been like, "Oh, that was bull. He went to be a manager." Like, no, he didn't. He actually did take I don't know if it's considered an executive position, but it was definitely an office position with WCW. I remember they, not long after this, WCW brought a B or maybe even a C house show to Columbus, Mississippi, to the Lavender Coliseum, where I had went and seen the Nightmares wrestle for Continental all those years. Like I say, B, maybe even C show that was headlined by the Junkyard Dog versus Dick Slater that heard the scattered audience in the arena chant "We Want Flair" throughout the entire thing. But Bill was running around there in Zubaz and a airbrush shirt with his picture on it, wearing a fanny pack with paper and his glasses on, and he was running the show. And not long after that, as the story goes, they were going to put Larry Zbyszko with Lord Steven Regal in that position. And Bill said, everybody knows Zbyszko. Like, nobody's going to buy that. Like, at least I've got an accent. Just let me do it. And
right.
Sir William was born. And he had that run as, Regal's manager. And, of course, spoiler alert, this wasn't the end of Bill's wrestling career by a long shot. But we'll get to that later. As far as we know right now, this is Bill's swan song. He's about to have his very last TV match in the ring with Mean Mike Miller of Portland wrestling fame. And then he was going to go on a little farewell tour around the loop this week. So Bill steps in the ring with Mean Mike Miller. I guess it was more of a fight than a match, even though, as far as I know, this wasn't an angle. They didn't come into this hot. They didn't have any kind of heat going into this. But, I mean, I've seen less punches thrown in a boxing match than a wrestling match. And it's basically just the exchange of punches for several minutes. But Dave Brown points out that Mike Miller looks like he's been in a car wreck or something. He's got bandages all over his face. He's got a black eye. He looks pretty rough before the bell even rings. But they have a decent little match that goes a few minutes until the Master of Terror hits the ring along with Mike Samples, and they attack Bill Dundee. What do you guys think about the match up to the point that the Master of Terror and Mike Samples come in?
Well, I mean, like you just said, it wasn't really much of a match. At first, I was thinking, are these guys okay? Like, did they have some words in the back? Because it was like you said, just punch, kick, punch, kick. At one point, Bill was actually one of my trainers when I started in wrestling. And I remember he showed us some like holes in case, if you ever have a guy shoot on you in the ring. Yeah. And one of them was that little like arm drag thing that he did, which was like out of a waist lock. Yeah. And I saw him hit that move on him, and I was like, okay, Bill might be for real here. Like, Bill might be like trying to beat up Mike Miller. And I'll be honest, I didn't remember Mike Miller. So when I saw him, I was like, man, this guy's like, he shouldn't be given, like, Bill shouldn't be taking this much from him. It should just be Bill dominating. And so I was kind of like really intrigued by it. Like, it was the first time I was watching it, because I was like, well, I don't know who Mike Miller is, and I know who Bill is, and they're throwing punches, and well, some of these might be live.
Mike Miller, it was always a name I would always read about. Like Gene said, he was from Portland Wrestling, but I would always read, and his name would be up there in the top for Portland Wrestling's rankings and PWI and stuff. So I knew he was like somebody, but I hadn't seen him very much either. But he's a big guy, so I figured maybe that's why Bill was just going hard on him, because maybe Mike Miller wasn't going to take any crap from Bill, and vice versa. And it was really intense. It seemed like it was a big deal.
Yeah, and I didn't understand why they were pointing out, like you said, so much about Mike Miller's face.
Well, he's sprinkling it in there.
Yeah. We find out later why. We were definitely foreshadowing there, but yeah, it almost felt awkward. Like, why is Dave even pointing that out?
Right.
But yeah, the way the match was so heated, you would think that we're setting up for his week run out, his week-long run leaving the territory was going to be against Mike Miller, but turns out it's not. So the Masters of Terror, they are Ken Wayne and Ken Raper. Unfortunate pairing of names. Anyway,
right.
Only one of them appear at this point in the show. I believe it's Ken Raper, just based off his movement, because it didn't look like Ken to me, but I don't know. But let's take a look. So they jump Bill. They put the boots to him in the ring. They throw him out on the floor, and this happens.
Jarrett throws Dundee down on the floor. Oh, come on, stop this. Got him up in the air, dropping him with a pile driver on the floor. Mike Samples egging him on. Master of Terror has him up in the air again for the second time. He drops Dundee with a pile driver. Samples over with a boot to the back. Master of Terror continues to work on him. Mike Samples.
Naked.
Okay, so this is where I feel like this is a good time to state this disclaimer.
Yeah.
So we talked about at the beginning of the show what big fans of Memphis wrestling and wrestling in general we are. And so, we're here to do a podcast because, we want to go back, and because I feel like this is kind of an ignored era. There's tons of podcasts about Memphis wrestling from the 80s. I'm even involved in one about 85, but there's not a lot of talk about the 90s. There's going to be some times, not everything in Memphis wrestling was great all the way back into the 80s. I mean, there's stuff going on in 85 that me and Ray Russell are watching, and I'm like, well, I don't remember this being better than this. So we're not here to dunk on Memphis wrestling. If people are going to get upset, at times we're going to have some fun with some things, and these two pile drivers are probably going to be a couple of those things, because in Memphis wrestling for years, a lot has been built around the pile driver. You know, Lawler has used it. You know, they first of all, you know, years and years before this, decades even, you know, they made the pile driver illegal in Tennessee through the athletic commission to make it, you know, a banned maneuver, to make it mean something. And, you know, Andy Kaufman laid in a Memphis hospital perfectly fine for days in traction to sell a pile driver. Guys would get pile driven in the ring sometimes and be out for weeks. And if anybody got pile driven on the floor, hang it up. They're out. They're getting on a stretcher and leaving. You're not gonna, that may be how they leave the territory, you know,
right.
If they're going somewhere else. Now we watched Bill just take 2 on the concrete floor and then followed up by some stomps that couldn't have been their proudest moment either.
Right.
What do you guys take on that? Am I being too harsh? What's your thoughts?
No, I mean, I feel like whenever you see somebody give a pile driver and they put their hand down to catch themselves, because concrete's hard to take a butt bump on. I don't know if you know that, but I mean, I felt like more it would probably hurt the Master of Terror more than it did Bill. From all that weight coming down. But it's like you said, you know, like you look at this and you, as a kid, or when I was younger and I saw this, I was like, okay, they attacked it. You know, it wasn't the fact that he was, you know, brutally beaten or anything like it was just, okay, he got attacked. But yeah, like you said, it was looking back at it. It's like,
But it does help though that the pile drivers were kind of gingerly given. And like, even as a kid, you could see that and say, well, maybe that's why what's going to happen in the future is going to happen.
He didn't get all of it. He didn't get all of it.
So then I question, like, so did someone from the sidelines who saw those 2 pile drivers, did they tell Mike Samples, hey, see if you can give him a better one? Because in this,
here's Mike Samples coming back. He nails Danny Davis, picks up Bill Dundee, and he's setting up for a pile driver. The 3rd pile driver on Bill Dundee out here on the floor. Davis and Lawler going back to work on it. And finally, Samples and the Master of Terror.
Now, admittedly, that one looked a little better. But of course, then you got Dave in the background for a 3rd pile driver.
Right.
So I'm thinking at this point, because I haven't seen this in, I don't know when, probably since it happened. I'm thinking, all right, well, let's send Bill's headed to Atlanta. You know, farewell. We won't see him again, but we'll see.
Yeah. I love how Mr. Uncle Danny there fell asleep at the wheel too. That was all I could think of, is like, I don't think I want Mr. Uncle Danny watching my back if somebody has pile driven me twice, because he was right there in position and just totally got knocked out of the way. He got another one on him. So
allowed him to get a 3rd one on him.
He's not Mr. Hughes.
Yeah.
It's true.
I would definitely not want to. Yeah, no.
All right, so on the show, we go to break after that, obviously, because we've just seen Bill Dundee take 3 pile drivers on the floor. We got to restore order, folks. So then we return from the break with Dave Brown interviewing the King, and Jerry Lawler says he thinks that 1993 will be an exciting year for wrestling. He says in recent times the competition in wrestling has been more between the different organizations than between the wrestlers. And then Lawler says that's bad for fans. He also thinks promotions like WWF and WCW are taking notice of the wrestlers in the USWA, as evidenced by WCW hiring Bill Dundee. And he said also that the WWF realized that the King was one of the most exciting wrestlers on TV, and that's why fans have been seeing him on WWF television lately. But Lawler reassures the fans that he won't be leaving home. He will always compete in the USWA. He alludes to Mike Miller's face, but says he won't address it and will leave what happened to everyone's imagination. We had no reason to think Lawler knew anything about Mike Miller's face or was involved, so that kind of seemed random. Before we move to the next point in this, I feel like we kind of need to touch on this because this is a touchy situation as far as I'm concerned. For years at this point in 1993, Jerry Lawler has taken shots at the WWF. He's called them a cartoon. He's basically implied over the years that WWF cartoon stuff's all fake. But down here in Memphis, we really fight. We really wrestle and all this. And now he's showing up on WWF TV. He has to wonder, how's the Memphis fans going to feel about it? So I guess this was kind of his way of addressing it. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I just thought it was kind of weird, like you're talking about. Like Lawler would say that the WWF and WCW's world champions aren't true world champions because they only fight people within their own organizations. And like you say, all of a sudden now we're seeing him on the television. So like as a kid, just looking at it through that lens, I thought it was extremely odd. And if you think back how like cutthroat things were back then and how serious it was to keep, the WWF separate, WCW separate, Memphis separate. And then you've got a guy who maybe at that point in time was a contracted WCW guy, Bill, being with a contracted around, at least working with a contracted WWF guy, Lawler. It was weird.
Yeah. And I think what makes this even more interesting is, I think this was after the fact that Lawler had sued Vince for announcing the King was going to be in, on his shows.
Right.
So it makes it even worse. But I think as a kid, I looked at this like, finally, because you're raised in the South, finally we're going to tell those Northerners what's for, So when Lawler came in being a heel in WWF, I was like, yeah, get him, Lawler. We don't have to listen to all this Yankee talk anymore, beat him up. But, you're the King. So I looked at it on the other end of the spectrum. Like I was proud for Lawler because he was standing up for us Southern wrestling fans, And
it wasn't, as far as like him being a heel there and a babyface in Memphis, that wasn't even really that weird because we'd already done that with the Texas feud, where he's on my TV every day on ESPN as a complete heel. And then Saturday morning, he's on my TV on WMC and he's a babyface. But it's like, well, it's Texas. Those people
right.
jerks out there. Of course he's a bad guy there. Right. So the next aspect of this promo, which to me is the most fun, Lawler brings up the Moondog Battle Royal from last week. And he talks about this was a battle royal where weapons were legal. And he mentions that he came in with a trash can and he worked folks over. And then he proceeds to complain that Mike Samples took something out of his pocket and hit him with it, costing him $10,000. I guess the trash can was okay because it didn't fit in his pocket.
Right. Yeah. When I hit somebody with it, everybody sees it. I'm not a coward with my weapons.
Exactly. Here's a little look at that.
Samples reaches in his pocket, pulls out some kind of object there, and knocks my lights out. Well, Mike Samples, like I said, I feel like you cost me $10,000, and so that there's no misunderstanding about it. Let's just take a second, take a look at what Mike Samples did, and then you're going to realize, punk, exactly why the King wants a little bit of your rear end. Lawler's got a trash can. Mike Samples, now there's Jarrett in there. He clobbered him with something. He pinned Lawler 2-3 to get him. That's it. Mike Samples, everybody saw it. You got it out.
There's Jerry in there.
Right.
I can't wait till he comes back next week.
Oh.
But yeah, that to me was just fun, is the fact that he laid it out completely like, hey, as a Moondog Battle Royal, anything goes. I was in there with a trash can just laid it out. But then that piece of shit, Mike Samples reaches in his pocket and hits me with something.
And I don't even what's funny was it looked like Lawler was just hitting whoever was around, just giving them straight jabs with it. Like, F you, F you, F you. And then Mike Samples, if you looked at this from a heel's point of view, Mike Samples just got tired of getting hit by a trash can and walloped that guy.
He's like, that bully Lawler going around screwing everybody over. I got something for you.
Ooh, and if you think you saw an example of that this week, wait till next week. We'll get there. All right. Well, right now we're going to take not only a break on the USWA show, we're going to take a quick break here on the podcast to hear one of our great podcasting partners, and then we'll be right back with more of this episode of USWA.
Hey guys, this is Wolfie D from PG-13. Check out my podcast, Live and in Color with Wolfie D, every Monday at noon. We're talking Memphis, we're talking ECW, WCW, WWF, everywhere that I've been. We even have some great guests, some Hall of Famers on the show with us. Every Monday at noon, Live and in Color with Wolfie D.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Give Me Back My Pro Wrestling, the podcast that's based on the old school, but can still help you find the good stuff from today. Jimmy Street and the Plastic Sheik, Jarrett, are the undisputed tag team champions of the wrestling podcast world. From thought-provoking topics to superstar interviews to action figure expertise. This team does it all. And all they ask is, give me back my pro wrestling. Every other Thursday, wherever you listen to podcasts.
All right, so at this point, we come back from the break, and the USWA Southern Champion, Jeff Jarrett, was here. And he's just out here to point out, to let us know to come out to the show in Dyersburg, Tennessee. Also, he'll be doing a meet and greet at the local video store. And then he tells us about a big show coming to the school in Houston, Mississippi, which was only 20 minutes from my house at the time. I had no idea at the time, or I would have been there. But that was fun. So real quick, let's talk about another aspect of Memphis wrestling. And this goes back to CWA up into the USWA days. So the Memphis television was 90 minutes long and basically was a 90-minute promo for the Monday night card at the Coliseum. However, in the other towns in the territory, they got a edited 60-minute version that cut out all the direct references to the Coliseum in Memphis. It took out all these little Jarrett's talking about being in Dyersburg, or tonight we're coming to so-and-so. And those towns were on what they called the bicycle. So them towns were a week behind. So this Saturday, they're seeing what we saw live in Memphis last Saturday, which, we've talked about over on the Memphis Wrestling 85 show with me and Ray. Had to be a bit of a challenge sometimes for some of the guys, cutting promos, or for Lance interviewing them, because you had to keep straight. All right, well, this is for this week, which was last week, which we ran into a couple instances where Mike Sharp rattles off the wrong stipulation for a match because he's talking about today, but all the other promos I guess he'd been talking about last week. So I don't know. To me, that's always kind of a fun aspect of all this, that you had to keep that straight. And then you're on TV today, you're talking about what's happening Monday night in Memphis. Then you're going to get in a car and you're going to go to Nashville and have a match based off last Saturday's TV and last Monday night show that you've been doing all week long throughout the territory. So it's a little bit of a different time then as far as how the TV worked.
Yeah, I wasn't aware that it was like that when I was a kid. Whenever I first figured that out, it was the first summer that I went up to Uncle Danny's school. I don't even know if it was called Ohio Valley Wrestling at that point. I think it was just... Yeah, Nightmare Inc. was on the business card or whatever. But at that point, he had already trained the Phantoms and Doug Basham and stuff like that, but he hadn't called it OVW. Either way, I go up there and I'm watching the Saturday morning, and I'm like, this is last week. What the hell? And it's only 60 minutes, and they told me, no, that's all last week. Anywhere other than Memphis, or you get their TV or whatever. If you get Memphis's TV, you get the real stuff, and if not, you're all a week behind. It was really weird to me. But
I always thought how weird it would be if you were traveling down to Memphis to catch a live show and you were in one of those markets. You would be a week off. Why does that guy have a shaved head now? And where's Dundee at? Where is everybody at?
But, kudos to the wrestlers, man. I mean, you always hear those war stories of late nights and you name the drug from whichever guy, but to keep up with all that mentally, and I'm sure they had help along the way, but still, I mean, if I have a late night, I'm not going to know shit the next day.
Yeah. And, Mick Foley talked about it in his book about how that was just odd to him that they were basically doing a loop and doing the whole show over again, in, the other territories, because he got some grief about something he was doing. And they were like, well, you shouldn't be doing that. And Mick was like, well, you're running, towns that are 2 hours apart, a week behind. And, it was just the first time I'd ever heard of that. I just never knew how they would do it if somebody from Indiana would come down to watch, a Memphis show live. They'd be so messed up that they were a week back. I wonder if they ever knew.
I can't believe that didn't happen more, because like you say, a lot of those towns weren't that far apart. It wasn't out of the realm of possibility. Somebody could have gotten their car in Memphis and went to Nashville or vice versa.
Right.
and then seeing the same show again, because they would do that. Somebody would lose the belts in Memphis on a Monday night, and then the other team they'd hand them back to them. And they'd go lose them in Evansville the next night. And they'd go lose them in Louisville, and they would lose them in, each town got to see that team win the titles like it was happening in their town, which is, in the era of kayfabe, I can't believe that isn't a bigger deal. Didn't hang them up more than a lot of this stuff, because people really, and I know Mick talked about it in his book. You referred to him, about how those tapings at Disney used to really expose some things, because you had guys cutting promos about losing belts they hadn't won yet and things like that. Same lines, but in a completely different era. But
maybe they were just banking on everybody being like us when we were growing up, just dirt poor and not being able to, because that was our thing. We couldn't go to Memphis because we were just poor. And maybe that was the demographic back then, was just everybody just can't afford to drive from, Louisville to Nashville to Memphis to catch these shows. So they're going to be in the dark.
Right. And they didn't talk about on Memphis TV. I mean, they would give like the local towns they were coming to, but you didn't necessarily know in Memphis that they were going to be in Nashville that night, or they did Evansville on Wednesday, or that, you would have had to know somebody from that town to even know that they did those shows every week, I guess. So I guess that was another factor as well.
Here's a question. They would show like somebody losing a title, like at the Mid-South Coliseum. Did they edit that to show them losing it at whatever facility? That's what they did?
Yes. So, because like we're covering 85, and some of the stuff we're seeing, like some of the like shows from the other towns. And so, they would show, and it would be the same finish that we saw from Memphis. Like, for instance, there was a match where kind of a convoluted finish with the interns and the Dirty White Boys for the tag team titles. And then you see the clip from, I forget which town it was, Jackson, Tennessee, or wherever it was. Jackson's not far enough away. I guess maybe it's Evansville, whatever. Right. But anyway, and it was the same exact finish, beat for beat. But it was from, it was footage from that town, where they did it again. So it's kind of, I don't know, like I say, it's just a fun aspect to me that, they were able to keep all that straight. Because Josh was saying, it's hungover as a lot of them were, and out of their head, you put that camera in your face like, wait a minute, what town is this?
Right.
Is this the week we're doing the Southern Street Fight, or is this the week we're doing the cage, or is the hair on the line this week? Or,
yeah. And poor Mike Miller had to beat the crap out of his face every week for a good 10 days.
Speaking of Mike Miller, so at this point in the show, after we hear from Jeff and hear about his appearance at the local video store, Dave Brown proceeds to tell the convoluted story about Jerry Lawler being at a New Year's Eve party where Mike Miller was there being drunk and unruly. So Lawler was asked by whoever was putting on the party to ask Miller to leave, which led to Lawler asking Miller to leave. Miller refuses to leave. I guess Lawler gives him the injuries to his face in the process that we saw earlier. And apparently this story wasn't going to be told, but since Miller attacked, Lawler, he had to go ahead and tell the story. So this is what happened. Lawler was doing at the end of his promo earlier. We forgot to mention this. I got sidetracked. I apologize. Let's take a look at, as Lawler was finishing up his promo earlier, this is what happened.
Thank pal. Me and you, I got a little date with you. Look out, Dave, look out, look out.
Mike Miller throwing a chair at Lawler. What is going on here? Miller, man, he came out with that folding metal chair up in the air, ready to throw it, and he did.
Sorry, I got sidetracked. We were talking about Lawler and the WWF thing and all that. So at the end of that promo, Mike Miller came out and attacked him, and that happened before Jeff come out to tell us about the video store in Dyersburg or whatever. So we don't understand what's going on. Miller comes out and throws this chair at Lawler, and now Dave's explaining that, all right, well, since Mike attacked him, I got to tell you that they were at a New Year's Eve party, and Mike Miller was drunk, and, blah, blah, blah. And then we move on from there for now. But believe me, we'll hear more about this convoluted New Year's Eve party story here in a moment. Oh, please go ahead.
Can I say that? Could we trust anyone to throw a chair in the strike zone as good as Mike Miller did just then? He was like 30 feet away, and he flung that chair, and it perfectly hit Lawler.
Like he'd done it before.
Like he had thrown chairs his entire life. He is the Nolan Ryan of chair throwing. You would think a guy with a messed up face would not be able to throw a chair like that.
He's squinting out of that one eye, and he's just dead eye.
Like, I remember like watching this back and hearing Lawler go, "Watch out, Dave." And I'm like, what is he talking about? That's how long it took for that chair to get there. That's
Yes.
how accurate Mike Miller is throwing a chair. He's like Uncle Rico. He's like, what do you think I could throw a chair over those mountains over there? And he would, and he'd hit Lawler right in the face with it.
I love that clip. Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to hang on to that clip and put it on the Facebook page because, yeah, it's and kudos to Lawler for looking out for Dave Brown there. Because, like you said, and watching it the first time, you're like, look out, Dave. And there's this long pause. It's like, what? And boom, here comes the chair. But yeah, he couldn't have threw that any. I mean, if they'd have done that 5 more times, I can't imagine he could have pulled it off any more perfect ever again. Because it was dead on. But right now, Danny Davis is coming out here, and he's pretty dadgum heated about what they did to Bill Dundee.
His brothers would be. Now, this week, Bill should be on his farewell tour, saying goodbye to all of his fans and everything. After all, he has had an illustrious career around here, 20 years in USWA. Well, that's something that a lot of people wish they could say. Well, Masters of Terra and Mike Samples, let me tell you something. I don't take kindly to you doing something to my friend. Right now, he should be shaking hands with his friends back in the dressing room, but no, because of you, he's laying back there flat on his back with an ice pack on his neck. Well, let me tell you something. We never claim to be the biggest. We never claim to be the baddest. But one damn thing is for sure, nobody's going to take advantage of my friend or somebody that I could call my brother. Do you understand? So I went to promoter Eddie Marlin, and I asked him point blank, since Bill is not going to be able to be there because of what you guys done, I want both Masters of Terra in a single match. This week, I want to wrestle one guy early and one guy late. And I can promise you one thing. When it comes to dropping somebody on their head, I know how to do it. Now, let me tell you something. I sent you out on a stretcher before, and you were able to come back. Well, I promise both of you something this time. You are not going to get away with what you've done to Bill Dundee. You'll both be carried out, and that's a promise from me, and that'll be a farewell message to Bill Dundee.
That's the word. Danny Davis wants both of them one at a time, and
Because of what you guys done.
Yeah, Danny has to shoulder some of that responsibility for just watching Mike Samples.
Give him another one.
That third time. But no, dude, like watching that back, Danny had that voice. You know what I mean? Danny had that voice when he said something, you really believed it.
Get out of my bag.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when he said something, it was like, you knew he would probably cash in on what he was saying
100%.
And even, though he didn't sell their size, or how bad Dundee was hurt was just with an ice pack, you believed like, yeah, Dundee's probably laying back there with an ice pack. He was believable.
If I've said this for years, if Danny Davis had been larger in stature, at least taller, there's no telling where he would have made it in the business as far as like WWF, WCW. That's the only thing that held him back because, in 87, he got in shape. He got all jacked. He had the promo. He had, like you say, that intensity. He was a great worker in the ring. That's the only thing that held him back was just his size, or he would have been a much bigger star and totally deserved to be. But that promo right there completely plays into what we were just talking about the whole bicycle thing. Because they just laid out right there that Bill Dundee's hurt. He's not going to be able to make it. And that now Danny Davis is going to take on the Masters of Terror in 2 separate singles matches at different points on the card. Remember that for later. All right, moving on. We won't spoil it right now, but just remember that, folks.
Right.
Because that will come into play later on. But they had to get that on video for when they chopped the show up to send it to the other towns, because Bill may or may not show up Monday night, but he ain't coming to them other towns. So we just covered that base. All right, so up next, we've got the King, Jerry Lawler, taking on Mr. Paradise. So let's take a look here. There's Mr. Paradise. Aptly named, I guess. Mr. Paradise, for those who know, if any of you are familiar with the old $5 High Spots, $5 Wrestling, Mr. Paradise looks like Jeff the Hitman Hart from $5 Wrestling and doesn't wrestle quite as good. But yeah, so, you know, he comes in, and another thing that struck me about the name Mr. Paradise, it reminded me, there's a famous quote from Kevin Nash when they asked him about the Oz character. That he said, one of the first things he said to Dusty Rhodes about the Oz character was that Oz is not a person, it's a geographic location.
Right.
I would think that much the same Mr. Paradise would kind of be the same way, but Jerry Lawler gets the win, and Mike Miller shows up again, and that turned out exactly like. And so I didn't get us a clip of that because, you know, as you can imagine, more punches and rolling around, which led to our second match of the day. Ends in our second interference DQ of the day here on USWA. Leads to a brawl and a big pull apart. And I'm sorry, I hate freaking pull aparts. I always have since I was a little kid. I remember watching the Road Warriors against Jerry Lawler and Austin Idol and it ending in a big pull apart and me absolutely hating it. And then I got involved in wrestling, had to be involved in some pull aparts, and the only thing worse than watching a pull apart is being involved in a damn pull apart.
Right.
What are you guys' thoughts on that?
I always hated pull aparts. Even when I was wrestling, it was like, all right, everybody needs to come out and pull these two guys apart. And I'm like, why would I care that, you know, that guy's fighting that guy? You know, if anything, I'd try to probably attack the babyface if I'm the heel. Why would I not try to attack the babyface while I was out there, get a cheap shot in? Like, I am so concerned with pulling my friend off of their friend that I'm not going to use my hatred to beat up my enemy. No, I was like, I always hated them. It's like, I don't mind having security and referees, but when you do the locker room clearing pull apart, it always kind of felt like a bit cheesy to me. I don't know why. It's just, it felt like we're suspending our disbelief that I'm not going to try to take a shot at my enemy.
Exactly. Yeah. And then there's the whole awkwardness of it. If you got 9 people holding one guy, 9 guys holding the other guy, and they hold them. Oh, and they get away, and then they get it, and then we do it again.
He shrimped out.
Yeah, come on. But all right, so we've now established through the chair throwing, through Dave Brown's story about the New Year's Eve party, and now our second interference disqualification and the big old pull apart, there is a problem between the King and Mean Mike Miller. So we go to break, and when we return from break, Mean Mike Miller is at the desk. He's blown up severely. Dave Brown to tell his version of the New Year's Eve party story, or as he put it, I'm going to tell all these idiots what happened. Miller says he's not a bad person, which then leads the fans to loudly chant Lawler's name. Miller says he was at a New Year's Eve party, and he saw Jerry Lawler having milk and cookies and signing autographs. I'm still waiting to hear how these two ended up at the same New Year's Eve party.
Right.
Both wrestlers, but they just do not look like they run in the same circles for any reason. But anyway, Miller says he had a couple of drinks and was talking to a lady friend when Lawler came and told him to leave. Miller made it clear he only leaves the place when he's ready to leave, and he wasn't ready to leave yet. So he says Lawler sucker punched him and assaulted him, causing him to ring in the new year flat on his back. And I'm assuming he had actually planned for his lady friend to ring in the new year flat on her back instead, but that's not. And then Miller says, I may not be one of the top in America, but I'm going to get my advantage. Whatever the hell that means. I mean, what y'all think of this promo?
Yeah. It was just, you know, me and Josh talked about it, and, you know, they always say the truth is somewhere in the middle. You know, there's your story, my story, and then the truth. And putting the two stories together from, you know, from Lawler and, or from Dave and then from Mike Miller, it kind of sounds like, you could kind of believe Mike Miller's story a little bit more. Like you could be like, yeah, I could see where Jerry just beat up a drunk guy at a party. Like I could go with that, but I gotta love the fact that Mike Miller sold himself so well. I might not be the best. I'm not even top 10.
I'm the top in America, but I'm going to get my advantage, which sounds like the guy on your t-shirt there.
Right.
Richard. I mean,
yeah. Wrong is wrong. I don't care what my ranking is.
It's funny because, it's long been said that, Jerry Jarrett had that sign on his office that said personal issues draw money. So that's what we're trying to do here is make this personal. But again, Lawler kind of, if you're looking at this from just completely kayfabe perspective, it's like, how dare this guy be drunk at a New Year's Eve party? Like, I'm guessing
Right.
Mike Miller wasn't the only one guy, but
Right. And you kind of sympathize with him, because he's at a party and he's like,
just
I
trying
leave.
to talk to a lady.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I leave when I want to leave, it's kind of like, well, yeah, I mean, it doesn't make you a great house guest, but
the thing about it is it said that the whoever was the owner of the house or whatever they were at asked Lawler to ask him to leave. Like,
you don't even own this house.
Didn't the owner invite him?
Yeah, you don't even own this house, and you're telling me to leave. No, Mike Miller kind of has my sympathy here a little bit.
And, he knows he's not on top of the world or whatever, but he's got that fire in him.
Yeah, and Lawler's punching down. Like literally punching down and literally punching down.
He's just had a few drinks. He's trying to mac on this lady over here, and Lawler's going to come over there and shut him down. And again, you make a good point. Like, okay, so this guy obviously invited Miller there. What, did he crash the party? Like, are we to assume this is Jerry Jarrett's house we're talking about? I don't know. But anyway, I can only assume that perhaps we may get to hear Jerry Lawler's version of events before this is over. But right now, we take another commercial break on the show, and then when we come back from the break, we're going to get some highlights right here of the Brian Christopher Jeff Jarrett match from last week and the head shaving. So let's take a look at that real quick.
Look at Zeke Rivers. Has that pain. Hooks Jeff's boot with it. He thought he had a pin. He got it. 1, 2, 3. Hey, Jeff gets the win. And look at Rivers over here. Zeke Rivers is thinking of Brian Christopher.
Oh, you know what you're doing? You are going to be sued. I'm going to sue this whole promotion.
Zeke Rivers in the chair getting his head shaved. And Boy Kelly from Aerosol done a good job on it. It's off.
He was so lighter from having that haircut that he jumped when he got out of the chair.
Fired at him like a jack in the box.
Do you know who Michael Berryman is?
Yes.
That looks
Heels
just
have
like
eyes.
him. Yeah.
That's a good call. That is
Which is
definitely a
funny
good call.
because independently, I had wrote in my notes, he went from looking like the head of a cult to a religious, like zealot cult follower, and it's just that wispy hair that had to leave.
Yeah,
And that was some long hair, too.
Yeah.
He went from Kenny G to Michael Berryman in one. I'll tell you what, they've come a long way with those clippers and these hair matches. Though I remember back in the day when they get those clippers, and they were ripping half the hair out of their head. They wouldn't hardly cut. Man, that was whizzing that hair right off his head. Like I was totally impressed with that. So kudos for that. And my other takeaway from what we saw there, and if you're listening to this audio wise, and I'm sure most of you are, the very first thing we see in that video is Jeff Jarrett going for the pin with a handful of tights.
I threw my hands up while we were watching it. I was like, what? Another good guy.
Well, he had to do something because all he basically did, like I have rolled over on my wife in bed harder than that pin. Like he was trying to do that old thing that Barry Windham was good about, was that little, or Ric Flair was good about, when every time you catch a cross body, you'd roll out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the timing was off. And during the suplex, I mean, and he couldn't, so he had to do something. But I mean, Jeff was the baby,
getting in his advantage.
Yeah.
I mean, so what we didn't see in that clip, but if you watch the match, and folks, if you want to watch the whole episode, it is available on my YouTube channel. We'll talk more about that later on. But during the course of that match, Jeff got hit with a chain. He got hit with powder. He took a cane shot from Zeke Rivers. He kicked out of each one of those separately before finally pinning Brian Christopher with a handful of tights after that very awkward roll there from that, like you say, that reversal, or what was supposed to be a reversal. But yeah, people used to talk about how Hogan was the most cheatingest babyface of all time, but I don't think those people saw Memphis wrestling, because there was quite a bit of cheating going on from our favorites down here.
Right.
And then so Jeff Jarrett stepped in the ring with a man known as the Bounty Hunter. Let's take a quick look at the
corner. Referee is right there, calling for the breaks, and out of the corner, back to the center of the ring. Look at the Bounty Hunter, found it on Jeff. Jeff reverses, moves it back into the corner, and returns the favor. Bounty Hunter shots Jeff into the corner. Jeff sets himself, and that boot puts the Bounty Hunter down on the mat. Jeff Jarrett goes after him, backs him into the rope. Upper arm coming off the other side. Bounty Hunter back to the ropes, flipped across the way, and Jeff this time with a clothesline puts him right back down to the mat. The Bounty Hunter moved a little slower than he did when the match began. Yeah, snaps him down, covers. This might be it. 1, 2, it is it. And the Southern champion has just...
I wish somebody would have gave the Bounty Hunter your grandmother's number to get some gear made.
He looked like a cat burglar.
Yeah. They just go through. It's like, well, here's a Brinks commercial. Let's get that guy off of here. Bring him in.
I told him it looked like our dummy that we made to practice on.
We had a wrestling dummy when we were kids made of like a ski mask, a shirt, some pants, and we had shoes on it, but kept knocking the shit out of ourselves with the shoes. But yeah, it looked like our dummy come to life.
Yeah, and who knew he eventually got signed to the USWA and made it before you guys did. So that's a real shame.
But dude, Jeff looked like $1 million in that, man. Like that, he was cut, he was big, he looked like money in that match.
Except for the DDT. He looked like.
Oh, I'm just saying, physically, he had it, man.
The DDT for Jeff always looked kind of weird, though, for me. But yeah, he looked like $1 million.
He went through. So early on, he had that drop kick off the second rope he would do, and then for a little bit he would just do a drop kick, and it took him a while to land on a finish, And then he started doing that leaping DDT like that. Like you said, was always a little awkward, and some of that had to do with him, and some of it had to do with the way, especially the enhancement guys, would take that move. Yeah. And watching ahead some weeks here, preparing for some of this, I've seen it taken way, way worse than that. But yeah, man, he looked great. He wasn't the skinny little kid that he was starting out in 87 and 88. And you knew at this point that it wouldn't be long before Vince would come calling. But I assumed he would come in as a fiery baby face there as he was here, but we would find out differently. But we'll get there in due time. So as that match was ending, Brian Christopher and the newly bald Zeke Rivers appear at ringside and demand that Jeff come over to the desk. And at that point, we get almost an exact replay of what we saw last week, where Brian wants a rematch. And Jeff states at the very beginning that if you're not putting your hair on the line, Brian, I don't even want to talk to you. I'm not even going to talk about a title match unless your hair is on the line. There's your baby face, drawing the line in the sand.
Right.
However, we would go on to, he offers up Mr. Clyde's hair. Jeff says he didn't want to hear it. He leaves, or goes to leave, rather. I'm not going to go through this whole scenario. Long story short, in the end, we're having a match for Mr. Clyde's hair, and there's some cash on the line with the promise of Brian said he'd put his hair on the line a week after next or some such.
It was a strange deal.
It's not my favorite angle, but Memphis is going to Memphis, and this is like the most Memphis angle in the world right here, where
Yeah.
you're stacking all these stipulations and hairs on the line, and this guy's hair's on the line. But this right here was I got one little piece from the promo here. Well, I'll say little, it's about a minute long. But let's check this out, and this will kind of give you guys a idea of how this played out with these Brian Christopher, Jeff Jarrett promos here for a few different
Big deal. I don't care about Zeke's hair, and I don't care about Mr. Clyde's hair. Unless your hair is on the line, don't even talk to me anymore, Brian.
Hey, listen, come here, Jeff Jarrett. Come here, boy, come here. Come here, sissy. Come here, sissy. Come here. Yeah, you're sissy. Come back over here. Hey, this week, listen to me. I will put Clyde's hair on the line and $1,000. $1,000. How does that sound, Jeff Jarrett?
Brian, you look real spiffy today in your suit. I guess you got best dressed when you were in high school, but I don't think you got most intelligence. Do you understand English? Unless it's your hair, no go.
Boy, I understand English, boy. I was a valedictorian in my class, you understand? I'm very smart.
That was my whole point of playing that clip. Was Brian saying the valedictorian. Now, the best part of that, to me, that could have just been Brian being a great heel and saying it that way to be a heel. But for those of us who kind of know Brian, there's also a good chance that's just how Brian thought you said valedictorian. It could go anyway. But one thing I really want people to take away from these podcasts, if you're listening to these and watching these with us, if you aren't familiar with USWA from this era or area for that matter, if you only know Brian Christopher as Grandmaster Sexay of Too Cool, that's cool. But man, Brian Christopher was such a great heel. I mean, he had such an ability to get under people's skin on the mic and just in general, be it on the mic or behind the curtain. I mean, he was just really great at it. And that's one of the things I really hate is that he never got a run as a heel on a national level, because I think they really missed the boat. And I know his size was a factor, just like with Danny Davis and things like that. But man, you go back and watch the USWA from 92 straight on, and he had his moments as a great babyface, and he certainly played that role well also. And there was times where they really needed him to play that role, especially when, you know, Lawler's off in WWF and Jarrett and everything. But man, I mean, only his talent at being able to talk and to get over on the mic, are you able to use an angle like this, something silly, is every week he's trying to put somebody else's hair on the line, and people are actually buying it and actually coming out to see it. Because that's why I want to show that clip, because as I explain it, I'm sure somebody's listening is going, well, shit, why would anybody care about that? But he has a way of, you know, getting over on the microphone and in the end, but it makes Jarrett look so silly, because Jarrett's just like, no dice, not happening. And then by the end of it, he's agreeing to exactly what he said in the beginning he absolutely would not agree to. But somehow you get it, because Brian just kept pushing and pushing until he got his way.
And we've all dealt with that person, right? The one's like, oh, let me try this. Let me try, you know, that salesman, that person that really can sell something to the point where you're like, if you'll just shut up, I will give this a shot. And then, yeah, I mean, but like you said, Brian was, you know, I knew Brian really well. And I remember begging him one time at his house, because we were doing a show. I can't remember where it was. We were doing a show, and he was teasing the fact that he was going to wear his old Too Sexy Brian Christopher Memphis gear. And I was begging him, because that was the time he was wearing the Grandmaster 6A jeans and stuff. And I remember just begging him, because I'm like, dude, you don't realize how over that was with guys my age in Memphis. Like, we would kill to see you back in like the old, you know, Brian Christopher gear from Memphis. But like you said, I don't know if he understood. I think he did understand like how over he was with that gimmick here in Memphis, but it was so serious and so intense that it was believable. He wasn't the dancing guy. He was very passionate about what he said, just kind of like what we said about Danny earlier. When he said something, he could either make you believe it as a baby, or he could totally just make you want to punch him in the face as a heel.
Well, Brian, he believed what he was saying. He had that look in his, I mean, Gene, you can look in a guy's eyes and tell if he believes what he's talking about or not. It translates when they're doing promos. And every single time Brian, he believed it. You could tell he believed it. He was totally immersed in that persona.
And for people who didn't know any better, who just assumed like, oh, he's Jerry Lawler's kid, that's how he got. Like, if you go back and watch this and you listen to the interviews over the years with Jerry Lawler, he got into wrestling in Memphis and got over in spite of being Jerry Lawler's kid. Like, Jerry Lawler didn't want him in the business. He did not help him get into the business. I mean, once he got in, he saw he was talented and he could do it, and he went along with it to a degree. But, Brian, I mean, from wrestling in his backyard with, his brother and, Tony Williams and all them guys to where he did that on his own. He was a super talented guy. He was really smart. He understood the business. He understood psychology. And if people don't get anything else out of this podcast, I really hope people get an appreciation for how good of a worker Brian was and how good of a heel he was. And he wasn't just Jerry Lawler's kid. And he wasn't just Grandmaster Sexay doing a silly dance. He had a lot more to offer to business, and I wish he'd have had a chance for more people to have seen that. So
just to add in
that opportunity to shine a light on that.
Yeah, just to add in what you were saying, he told us a story. We had him on our podcast back when we first started. I think it's like episode 16 or something.
Mm-hmm.
So it's way back there. And he told us that when he started out in the business, he showed up in a mask. Only like one or two people knew who he was. He put the mask on and he never took it off. Like, only a few people knew who he was under that mask. He said he remembered Bill coming up to him and going, "What are you, some kind of Mexican shooter under there, brother?" Because he wouldn't take the mask off and he wouldn't say anything to give up his identity.
Yeah.
And even in Lawler's book, he talked about how he didn't even know Brian was even interested in getting in the business. So he really did do it on his own.
Absolutely. Yeah. I just went back and I had seen it years ago, but I just went back recently kind of preparing for this podcast and was rewatching some shoot interviews with people. I rewatched Lawler's, and he talked quite a bit about Brian and how he got in the business and kind of got in it around him, but certainly not because of him.
Yeah.
But anyway, speaking of the King, now the King comes out and he's going to tell us his version of the New Year's Eve party story. However, in his version, it wasn't actually New Year's Eve. It was the day after. Which totally kills Miller's whole "I rang in the New Year flat on my back." Why were they even at the same party? But Lawler just had to point out that he actually spent New Year's Eve having fun with real friends, which had to be a slap in the face to whoever's party this was.
Right.
If it actually had been a party. But again, pointing this aspect out kind of to me takes away from the whole point of this whole thing. I don't really get that, but anyway, but otherwise it's kind of more or less the same story that Dave Brown told us. And again, I know this was going along with Memphis's credo of personal issues draw money, but this might have been a stretch to me as far as trying to find a way of like, hey, looking around the dressing room, we need to get Lawler and Miller together. How can we do that? And somebody's like, so they got in a fight at the New Year's Eve party, and I don't know, man. It's reaching. I think you could have got there a better way, but I mean, I don't know. How do you guys feel about this New Year's Eve party that apparently wasn't a New Year's Eve party angle?
I really, just thinking back, I was into it, man, because a lot of Memphis's stuff that they would present, it would be a stretch. You'd like, why does Bill care about this guy, talking to this guy this way? Like, why is he blowing up to this extent because of this? But yeah, I mean, like in real life, we would hear our parents, we would hear our, anybody talking about real life situations like this. And it was almost like it was really, really, really believable because, we had family members acting that way and stuff like that happening. You had
family members getting punched out drunk by Jerry Lawler.
I'm saying at parties, there were situations, somebody get their ass kicked, whatever, it's relatable. Is what I'm saying.
And I think the biggest thing about this angle too, it was like, one, it's like Mike Miller and Lawler. You don't really see those two on a card against each other. So it's kind of believable. And on the second side of this is like, not everything happens on camera. You know what I mean? Like, there are things that you hear about, and it's like third party. Every fight that you heard about growing up as a kid, it wasn't like you were there witnessing everything that happened. You just heard, oh, so-and-so's mad at so-and-so, and they're going to the ballpark and fighting after school. And you would go just because you heard the buildup. You didn't have to see it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you both make a great point. I do wish Lawler would have left it on New Year's Eve. I don't really know why we needed that little detail thrown out there that kind of threw a monkey wrench in all of it, in my opinion. But yeah, you make a good point. And I've always kind of wondered, those marks on his face and the black eye and everything look kind of legit. I wonder if he actually had a wreck or something that week, and they decided to spin it with this, or he got hit in the match, or how that played out, or who knows? Maybe this was a real thing that happened. I don't know, but it's interesting, and we'll see how it plays out. But right now, we're going to take our second break of the show. Don't step away. Listen to these words from our podcast friends.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF Project. You can also listen to the Regional Rasslin Podcast, where we talk the territories, whether it's Jamie Ward with Georgia 81, Roman Gomez with the UWF in 1986, or Gene Jackson covering Memphis in 85. 3 projects going on right now over there at Regional Rasslin. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. Bob goes back in time each and every week, covering not just his career, but countless stories and interactions with hundreds of wrestling names spanning his 2 decades in the business. But that's not all. You can also check out the Puro Wrestling Academy with the professor of Puro Resu, Mr. Dan Ginnity. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met, from Apple to Spotify, Pocket Cast, and beyond. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Rasslin Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Rasslin Grenade. And why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Rasslin Grenade. So if you're looking to support that next up and coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia.
All right, guys, we're back, and yes, we are excited to be a part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, and we appreciate Ray Russell and everything he does for us here. And as we return to the show, Mike Samples and Leslie Ballinger are out at the desk, and we're going to talk a little more about them in the upcoming weeks. But since this show's already kind of running long because of talking about last week, we're going to move through. Samples lets us know that Burt Prentice isn't here. He's off in Dallas handling some business of some sort. Samples is here to give us our weekly reminder that Miss Texas is actually a dude named Bubba Johnson. I guess someone forgot to tell him that personal issues draw money unless it's some ridiculous crap like someone named Miss Texas. There's someone like Miss Texas would be named Bubba Johnson. But anyway, they're out here to promote another tag team match coming up against Miss Texas and Eddie Marlin this Monday night. And so we've got that going for us this week. Another tag team match for those 4. So we'll see how it plays out this time. Last week, Eddie Marlin and Miss Texas come out on the bad end of it. We'll see how it goes this week. Then on to the ring for the new USWA Tag Team Champions, the Bruise Brothers, Ron and Don Harris, taking on Ben Jordan and Mountain Man Miller. Ben Jordan I'm familiar with. I've tried to do some research. I can't find much about Mountain Man Miller, other than he apparently had a pig named Arnold. Wonder where you guys that from. But anyway, I can also have Miller confirm or not whether or not he's related to Mean Mike Miller, and if in fact he was at the New Year's Eve / New Year's Day after party.
It was a hoedown.
Yeah, I was involved in that whole controversy. If you know, folks, please message us. But anyway, this was basically just a assault disguised as a tag team match. As the Harris Twins just beat the piss out of these guys. Mountain Man Miller got flung into the desk out there, and I could not believe, like, one of the Harrises gave Ben Jordan one of the just roughest looking power bombs I've ever seen, and he kicked out. And as a result, we have yet our third disqualification of the day due to a run-in because the Moondogs hit the ring. And let's take a quick look at that.
I don't think there's any 10 referees that can send these guys out here. If you want to send them out, let them do it. You want to go up, Cummings? No, I don't. But he can simply disqualify them. I don't think I can qualify if I were in. Everybody in the ring. Oh, wait a minute. Let's go. Here come the Moondogs and Richard Lee. That'll take care of the Harrises, I betcha. Moondogs in with a chair and a big piece of plywood. Richard Lee's got a chair folded up. He says, come on, Mike Samuels, you want some of me? Here it is. Moondogs throwing the Harris brothers over on the table. Continuing to work them over down here on the floor. You get in there and stop it. That's your team there, the Harris brothers.
Whew. Can you think of a stiffer tag team match you could book than the Moondogs against the Bruise Brothers?
No, and I was watching this back this week and looking at this, and I remember when we were like 12 years old, they had Memphis Wrestling come to like Northside High School here in Jackson, and I remember the Harris brothers came out there, and they got in the ring, and I went to yell, "You guys suck!" And I got to you. And one of them looked at me. I don't know if it was Ron or Don. One of them looked at me, and I could feel the piss start on all my legs, like going down my thighs and everything. It's like, dude, they were massive. They had that look like they did not care, And then you got the Moondogs, who've I always wonders, like, how do these guys just function in normal life? Because as a kid, I just believed that's the way they were. You can't tell me they have a bank account or anything that's civilized. They go. Richard Lee drops them off in the woods, throws some food on the ground, and then travels back and grabs them. He snares them in a trap and brings them back to Memphis. These guys weren't real. Like, I don't think I've ever seen them throw a real wrestling move in there. It was just always boards, chairs, and chains. So when I saw this, even now, I was getting fired up because I want to see that match. Like, I want to see how hard-hitting that match is.
Yeah, the Bruise Brothers, man, I always thought that they were like the unlikely candidates to beat the Moondogs, I mean, because like thinking back, the Moondogs, they went through everybody, it seemed, for 1992. I mean, wasn't they like it was Lawler and Jarrett versus the Moondogs. That was the number one feud for 92 in PWI, I think it was. Like, it was heated. And then, I didn't really know who the Harris brothers were really before Memphis. I mean, so it was like these big guys, don't get me wrong, but watching Memphis growing up, and that was our main thing. Like, the Moondogs, they were almost unbeatable because the King and Jeff Jarrett could barely beat them. You know?
Well, it started out Jarrett and Robert Fuller against the Moondogs, and they took out Fuller, and then Lawler stepped in to that feud.
Right.
And like you said, they ended up with Feud of the Year, and my gosh, they fought all over the territory for over a year, and they replicated some of those concession stand brawls on a couple of different occasions. And, yeah, the Moondogs had just been staples of the Memphis territory for years and years and years. And, of course, Larry Latham, Moondog Spot, was the staple, and then you rotated out your other Moondog. At this point, we're talking Moondog Spike, which was Bill Smithson. But at different points, you had Randy Colley, which was Rex, and then you had, Moondog Cujo, who I think he had been in as Ox Harley, and he had 2 or 3 different names and gimmicks. And I know I was shocked as a kid to find out that Moondog Spot had once been Larry Latham of the Blonde Bombers teaming with Wayne Ferris back in the day, and was actually a civilized human being at one point. Having grown up watching Moondog Spot all those years, that was pretty crazy. But yeah, they get out here and they basically run the Bruise Brothers out of the studio. And you mentioned you weren't really familiar with the Bruise Brothers before now. I remember as a kid, the Bruise Brothers showing up as Ron and Don Bruise in like '88, and they look like two Brian Lees of the time. And I ain't talking about Roughneck Undertaker Brian Lee. I'm talking about the original long blonde hair mullet Brian Lee. So at one point they teamed together and it was like three of them almost. It was like triplets, twins. And then they disappear for a while and they show back up looking like this. Like, well, they just go live in a biker bar for 6 years and then they turn back up and, they got tattoos and it's like they grew a foot taller almost. And now they're fighting the Moondogs, and I'm believing it, And so after they ran the Bruise Brothers out of the studio, Richard Lee cuts a babyface promo. Thankfully, he didn't have his guitar with him. He didn't try to sing like he did the previous week. But this was kind of unique in itself here in this whole scenario because it's like the Moondogs as the babyfaces, and especially Richard Lee out there cutting babyface promos on behalf of the Moondogs. But that was another Memphis staple, too, is, most guys who got over as the biggest heels, if they hung around long enough or they came back, could be some of the most over baby faces because somewhere along the way they earned the fans' respect. And the fans knew, like, man, they ain't about that bullshit. Like, we need to go see them because, yeah, these Harris brothers are bad, but they can handle the Moondogs, So, it works. I mean, if you told a year before when they're feuding with Lawler and Jarrett, like, them guys are going to be good guys in 6 months. Get out of here. Ain't no way. But it's happening. It's working. And they're feuding over the tag titles. And so they're going to be squaring off again Monday night. We'll get to that here in a moment. But first, after Richard Lee cuts his promo, Eddie Marlin came out. And he had something to say. And, well, let's just let Eddie tell you himself. All right, check this out.
I can't see myself hitting you with this fist. But let me tell you something, young lady. I'll call you a lady whether you are or not. If you lay one hand on me, if you're in the ring when I'm in there, I won't hit you with my fist, but I hope you took a good look at Zeke Rivers, because I'll snatch every bit of that red hair out of your head, and your head will look like his. And then I'll turn you over my knee, and I'll spank you, little girl, just like your mother and daddy should have done years ago. Now, I said I wouldn't hit a lady, but I will definitely pull that hair out, and I will definitely spank her.
Speaking of things that don't age well.
Wow. I love that.
Eddie Marlin, who's teaming with that man, Bubba Johnson. He won't punch a woman. He's better than that. But he will snatch her bald, and he will spank her, and he will pull that hair.
That's the old Southern mentality, though. My grandmother, she used to have this thing she would tell us, and she always dipped a snuff. So she always talked like this right here, but she always had snuff in her mouth. And she would just tell us, say, Richard Lee. My middle name's Lee, by the way. I was going to say, I always got crap from my uncles because I hated Richard Lee so much, and they would call me that. I'm not running the Moondogs. But she'd say, Richard Lee, I'm going to tell you something. Ain't nothing sorrier than when a man puts his hands on a woman. But when a woman puts her hands on a man, she has put herself in the place of a man, and she should be treated as such. And I was like, my grandmother's telling me to beat up a woman if she hits me. Like, this is the weirdest thing ever, but that's that Southern mentality. It's like, I'm not going to hit you, but if you hit me, you're now a man.
Me and my little brother got into an argument with our parents at the dinner table one time because my dad's like, you never hit a woman. And I go, unless they hit you first. And my brother's like, yeah. He's like, no matter what. You never hit a woman. And my brother goes, unless they hit you first. No. And we went back and forth like that for a half hour almost. But I've always been in that mentality. Like, I don't believe in hitting a woman, but I believe if a woman's dumb enough to hit you, very good.
What if she's got a gun on you or something?
Yeah, That's another podcast.
I can't hit you. Yeah.
We won't go down that rabbit hole. So I'm not sure if this next match was supposed to be a scheduled match or if this was just a coincidental brawl as the Masters of Terror came to the ring, which brought out Danny Davis and Bill Dundee, who was sporting a neck brace. I mean,
Neck brace?
towel around his neck. A little neck brace. I mean, did they not know they were doing this angle? That somebody didn't have the wherewithal to run by CBS? Like, hey, why don't you grab one of them $10 collars? That,
even like a neck pillow.
No, brother, don't use a towel.
Like one of those airport neck pillows things.
I'll grab a towel from the Days Inn.
Tape it on me.
They fought in and out of the ring for a few minutes to give us a sample of what to expect this Monday night. And in case we didn't know, because I mean, these two teams have only been feuding for like 19 weeks. It seems like. I mean, we recapped last week, but the reason they had to have the Oriental Death match is because they had been feuding every week for I don't know how long. But they decided to pull one more out for Dundee's last hurrah. And so they brawled all around the studio, and then Bill cuts a promo for us. So let's listen to what Bill has to say, and then we'll kind of discuss the fact that as far as everyone in the other towns know, Bill Dundee has been taken out. He was laying in the floor back there dying, according to Danny Davis, and we'd seen the last of him. But now, for us in Memphis that see the rest of the show, well, this is what we see.
Dave, boy, I was a little surprised to see you, but you handled yourself well.
Well, thank you, Dave. Come Monday night, boys, I'm going to get real early at that Coliseum, and I'm going to be real nice to all them nice fans that come down to say goodbye to Bill Dundee. But when that bell rings, you sure as hell I'm going to get mad. And if you bastards of terror think you're going to put me out and make a fool of me on my farewell deal, you're wrong, brother. Monday night, I'm climbing into the ring for the last time, and I'm retiring. And if I got anything to do with it, and Danny Davis got something to do with it, you boys is going to be retiring because you're going to be hurt, brother. And we're going to jerk their mask off or try, because I believe you're ugly sin underneath that, but that's neither here nor there. Counting 1, 2, 3 don't mean nothing. We're coming to hurt you. And like I said, Monday night's the last time I'm walking down that aisle and climbing into that ring. And it's to beat you two punks up. And Mike Samples, you're going to get a little of it too. Dave Brown, it's been nice. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Good luck.
I love that he cuts this fired up promo. But he still takes a moment to shake Dave Brown's hand and thank him.
It's like, what do we have in here that looks like a neck brace? Give me that Walmart sack over there. I'll put it around my neck.
It works just as well, honestly. But that's not my favorite part of the promo, honestly. The handshake at the end. My favorite part of that promo is while Dundee is yelling and screaming, Danny Davis is over there miming pile drivers and wrestling holds. It was like he was translating for the deaf if he didn't know how to do sign language. It was just like,
yeah. Maybe he thought it was a training exercise where it was like, you say the move and I have to act it out.
I'll
like,
demonstrate.
Yeah. What does it look like? Power driver. Yeah, right here.
Only enough mic time. He's like, you come be my cheerleader, brother. Like, cool.
Josh's like, Uncle Danny's never coming on here. Y'all have made fun of him more than you have anybody else on this.
Yeah. It would have been hilarious if Bill would have been like, if you would have been sleeping with the wheel, brother, I never would have caught that third one.
I still have a few vertebrae, brother.
Damn it, Danny. You're never getting hired by WCW as long as I'm an executive.
Right.
So, all right. So that closes out the show there. That was, I guess, our main event match of the night, even though. So to recap, we've had, was it 4 or 5 matches today? Jeff Jarrett pinned the Bounty Hunter after a DDT, and everything else was either a run-in disqualification or never really got started because that match was just a brawl from the word go. But let's let Dave Brown quickly run down the card for Monday night and let us know what this has all been building up to, because we all know that Saturday morning wrestling is just a commercial for Monday night. It's just a way to get us down there to see this. So let's see what we've been building towards.
See, 7:30 is when it all begins. First main event of the night, Bert Prentice and Leslie Bellinger in a regular tag team match against Eddie Marlin and Ms. Texas. Eddie Marlin's told you what he has in store for Leslie Bellinger if she doesn't behave herself. Then the second match of the night, Bill Dundee's farewell match, and this one now will be as it is booked. It stands. Bill Dundee and Danny Davis going against the Masters of Terror. Following that, you've got a 10-round boxing match. Jerry Lawler going against Mike Samples. Lawler says Samples cost him $10,000 by hitting him from behind. and he's going to get even in the boxing match. Jeff Jarrett against Brian Christopher. Not exactly what Jeff wanted, but close to it maybe, as Brian Christopher says this week he's going to put Mr. Clyde's hair on the line and $2,000 against the title of Jeff Jarrett. And if Jeff can beat him this week for the second time in a row, then next week he says, I'll put my hair on the line against that belt. That's what Jeff is looking for. Can he beat him Monday night to take it to the hair versus title match with Christopher's hair at stake a week from now? Then, the big main event of the night, in which the Moondog Lumberjack tag title match will occur. The Lumberjacks will be stationed around the ring with folding metal chairs, steel chairs in their hands. That's why they call it a Moondog Lumberjack match. It will be a tag title match, as the new champions, the Bruise Brothers, Ron and Don Harris, with Mike Samples in their corner, will be defending against the Moondogs and Richard Lee. And from indications here today in the studio, I got to tell you, the Moondogs and Richard Lee are mighty upset about losing the belts and are looking to take them back come Monday night at the Mid-South Coliseum.
All right, guys. So, we've watched this episode. So, every episode, we're going to end this where I'm going to ask you guys 3 questions before we go take a look at what happened Monday night. So, my first question I pose to both of you is, what is your least favorite part of today's episode?
I would have to say you touched on it, just not having a finish to most of the matches. That, and I just didn't care that much about Mike Miller's face, and how that, as a kid, I would never have believed that anything between Mike Miller and Lawler would have drew, It wasn't really inspiring to me. But yeah, I think as a kid, I also wanted to see matches end the right way, and having DQs and run-ins, that was probably my least favorite part of the show.
Josh?
I guess, it's not that I just disliked this, but it seemed like everything else overshadowed it, I guess. It was, that quick thing with the Harris brothers and the Moondogs, it was just like, the Harris beat up Ben Jordan and the other Miller guy, Man Mountain Mike Miller, and beat him out of his shoes. And, that was really quick. Then the Moondogs come out, and that was really quick. Richard Lee does a quick promo, and the whole thing is probably less than 5 minutes. And it's just like, to me, that makes it seem, I guess, a little unimportant. But given the time, I think they could have built it up. But just with everything else that's happened and that's my least favorite.
All right, so on the opposite end of that spectrum, what was your most favorite part of this show?
Lawler and Mike Miller. Seriously, I love the realness of it. I've said it before, but that's what I fell in love with again. I've seen this when it happened, but rewatching it, I'm like, man, they didn't have anything going before, but this is serious. Like, this is a real life deal. Lawler, was at a party. Oh my God. And then they jumped him here. Maybe some more of this stuff could happen, it really, really, really drew me in back then. And even now, cause I can't remember what happens next week, and I really want to know. And, honorable mention would be Eddie Marlin, dude. He was hilarious. Super hilarious.
Yeah, at one point, he just come out and said, "Match is booked," and walked off.
I'm not going to hit you, but I'm going to pull your bald head and I'm going to give you a spanking.
Yep.
I love it.
And then he recapped it. It's like, as I won't hit you, I will pull your hair, and I will spank you. Because the first time sounded like a threat. The second time I'll sound like, so, if you want to hang out after, I won't hit you, but I will pull your hair and I will spank you.
You're so clear.
And it can get rough if you want. So I guess in some ways you just answered this, Josh, and Richard kind of answered it earlier in the show, but we're going to ask it every time. So if we were in 1993 right now and you're in reasonable driving distance, would today's TV show alone have inspired you to go buy a ticket to Monday night's event?
I would have went just for the fact that it was Bill Dundee's last time being there, and I know this might be it. This is the last time I'm going to get to see Superstar in action. I would have went, and then I would have wanted to see that Moondog match, and I would have wanted to see if Mr. Clyde got shaved bald. Like, I knew he would, but in my mind, I would be like, yeah, I want to see what happens. I want to see what Mr. Clyde looks like bald, because I'm a sucker for the head shaving gimmicks. But yeah, Dundee would be the drawing factor there for me.
That's my answer too. I mean, like the thing with Uncle Danny and Bill Dundee and the Masters of Terror is so intense, and the Masters of Terror is going to get their ass whipped. It's just how bad. And you figure the Oriental Death Match didn't do it, and then they're trying to make Bill Dundee roll up to his desk in WCW, not walk up to it.
No.
So I mean, that's white hot right there. I would want to go just for that one match.
That's a fun thing about Memphis that they did a lot over the years, that they would have something you think this is absolutely positively got to be the blow-off match, such as the Oriental Death Match. And then the next week, they find a way to make you come see it again. They double down, and now it's like Bill Dundee's last match ever. Holy cow, I've got to see this, where you never would have thought you'd have went and paid to see that same match again, but now it's got a whole other element to it. Now it's a whole different ball game. So before we can head to the Mid-South Coliseum on Monday night, though, guys, we got to leave the TV5 studio. We got to drive over to Nashville to the fairgrounds because we got a show tonight. All right. So, spoiler alert, some of this may sound a little bit familiar. The results are as follows. Leslie Ballinger and Mike Sample beat Miss Texas and Eddie Marlin. Bill Dundee and Danny Davis beat the Masters of Terror in an Oriental Death Match. Ron and Don Harris won the USWA tag titles that he just had on Memphis TV from the Moondogs, Spot and Spike. Southern title versus the Valet's Hair, Jeff Jarrett versus Brian Christopher. Now, I don't know how this plays out. You already shaved. I don't pick him and dramatically snatch it off. I would love to know how that works. And then in the USWA title versus the Mask, somehow, some way, Jerry the King Lawler beat the Christmas Creature, and once again, it was Glenn Jacobs again. And then in the main event, he pulled it off one more time. Moondog Spike won the Moondog Battle Royal. So now we are ready to make a trip down to the Mid-South Coliseum. Now, you guys remember that last week I told you that card that we discussed, headlined by Jerry Lawler versus the Christmas Creature, headlined by the Moondogs and the Bruise Brothers, the Oriental Death Match, Hair versus Title. That card drew 3,500 people. All right. January 4th, 1993, Mid-South Coliseum, Memphis, Tennessee. Drawing a crowd of 1,000 people. Burt Prentice and Leslie Ballinger beat Eddie Marlin and Miss Texas. The Masters of Terror beat Bill Dundee and Danny Davis when they pinned Bill Dundee. Did the right thing on the way out. Kudos, superstar.
Mm-hmm.
In a match, Jerry Lawler beat Mike Samples via DQ in a boxing match.
Maybe fell out of the ring.
Yeah. USWA Southern Championship versus Mr. Clyde's Hair and $2,000 cash. Jeff Jarrett beat Brian Christopher, and Mr. Clyde had his head shaved, and Jarrett collected $2,000 cash. And then, in a lumberjack chair match, where all the lumberjacks around ringside had chairs in their hand, Ron and Don Harris, the Bruise Brothers, went to a double disqualification with the Moondog, Spot and Spike. How the F do you get a double DQ in a lumberjack chair match? Only in Memphis. Yeah. And then, after we had that in the semi-main event, in the main event, where Jerry the King Lawler faced Mean Mike Miller, does anybody want to guess, take a wild guess at what you think the result of this match was?
Josh?
Oh, Mike Miller's going over. It's the surprise, right?
I thought Lawler just beat him quickly.
I was just making a joke.
Double freaking disqualification.
No!
We're going to go another week with Mike Miller's face.
We dropped 2,500 people from last week's show. And so we give them a DQ in the boxing match. We give them a double DQ in the tag title match. We give them a double DQ in the main event. I'm bumfuzzled. And over on the Regional Rasslin Podcast, where me and Ray Russell has been reviewing Memphis 1985. Man, we've been reviewing cards where it's just DQ after DQ. matches with crazy stipulations. Like they had a Texas death match end in a disqualification. It's like, how? So again, we're not here to insult Memphis wrestling. We love it, but that's a head scratcher, guys. Like I would have thought you'd need to do something hot to try to get that crowd back. So we dropped from 3,500 down to 1,000. That is assuming these attendances are accurate that I'm getting online. Some of them are from the Observer, and some of them are just from random websites. But I assume they got them from the Observer at some point. So we will see what the next show draws coming out of this.
I would be interested to see what the next show draws, because looking at it, this show was the first one after Christmas, like the first one after that Christmas crunch. Yep. And knowing the South, how they are, everybody's broke right after Christmas. So I'm wondering if that played any into this equation, or maybe they just weren't that keen on seeing what happened to Mike Miller's face.
Well, because I'm going to say, let's be honest. I mean, you guys were very complimentary of the Mike Miller angle as far as putting over that the reason for doing it is it's something that's relatable, and that's all true. Yeah. But the fact of the matter is, and especially if you're going back in time looking now, this Christmas creature thing had played out over a period of weeks. So that was technically kind of a blow-off. Title versus the Mask. You had what you assumed was the blow-off with the Nightmares, Dundee and Danny Davis against the Masters of Terror in this Oriental Death match. You had this big tag title match with the Moondogs. All this was kind of building and the hair match with Jarrett and Brian Christopher. So I could see where that would draw big. And then, like you said, we're coming. So this is January the 4th. So this is week after Christmas, week after New Year's. Mike Miller is not a guy who's been heavily figured in or at the top of the cards at all in recent weeks in the USWA. So I got to think they probably didn't expect big things out of this card. This is kind of more of a placeholder card. But I would have thought, for the same reason that both of you guys said that you would have came to the show, and I felt the same way, I would have thought more people would have turned out to see Bill Dundee's last match. I don't think that they played that card hard enough on TV. I mean, yeah, they mentioned it a couple times and everything, and they had to kind of dance around it for the other towns and all that. But I really think they should have doubled down on that and really pushed that harder and really drove home like, hey, this is your last chance to see Bill Dundee in Memphis, and he's been a huge part of this. Because, if I'm Dundee, I'm probably leaving the Coliseum that night going, good riddance, I'm heading to Atlanta, and y'all can all just suck it because, 1,000 people showed up. Which, I mean, don't get me wrong, like these days, 1,000 people shows up anywhere. I mean, it's cause for celebration. We're high fives all around. But after you just had 3,500 and you only drew 1,000, I'm sure Dundee was like, screw this, I'm out of here, But
do you think them playing with that hokey pokey, like Dundee's not going to be here, he is going to be here? Do you think some people might have just turned the TV off before the end and not just thought Dundee wasn't going to be there?
Back to what I said earlier in the show, in 93, we're still a little more kayfabe. The internet isn't prominent now. Not as many people are as smart then as they are now. And you've been taught in Memphis, the pile driver is death, and you just watched Bill Dundee get pile drived on the floor 3 times, whether you thought the first 2 looked legitimate or not, whatever. But you see Bill Dundee get pile drived on the floor 3 times, and then he comes back out at the end of the show with a towel around his neck and has a fight. I mean, I thought that was a bad call.
Yeah.
Maybe limp out there and be like, against doctor's orders, I'm going to try to be there Monday night. But to have a studio brawl in the same show that you got, it's almost kind of like when they had to let Lawler come out after getting hit by the car because all the people were calling the cops, so they had to let him see. But it killed the draw for Monday night. I think that probably hurt him here. I think a lot of people were like, oh my God, Dundee just got pile driven 3 times on the floor. He's probably ain't gonna be able to go take that job in WCW. He's probably gonna have to be in a body cast the rest of his life. And then he comes back out at the end of the show in this towel for a neck brace, and now he's going to be there Monday, and we've already seen this match 18 weeks in a row.
Right.
Because that was the other thing too. If you listen to those 2 cards I just read off, pull the Christmas creature out of there, it was a rehash of the previous week. It was with Mike Miller plugged in for Glenn Jacobs and a boxing match with Lawler and Mike Samples. And at that point, Mike Samples was just considered a manager for all intents and purposes. So, I mean, it was kind of a lackluster card because it was just kind of a show full of rematches. And the only real stakes, like you said, was really Dundee's last match. But if you were kind of insulted by the fact that, like, they piled drive this dude on the floor 3 times, he came back out, and now I'm going to go watch him have another match with these guys, and they had an Oriental Death match last week, and they're having a
and no one died.
I mean, that's the kind of things that they did in Memphis, I think, that kind of hurt them sometimes. But, again, this is, looking back, all these years later, it's easy to be critical of it. But overall, it was a pretty good show. When I first we were getting ready to start this podcast, I was figuring out where we were going to jump off at, because I told you I was like 92, 93, I don't know. And I almost wanted to jump ahead in 93 to where the WWF guys started coming in, because I just read on paper, I was like, the first episode builds to a Mike Miller main event. Like, nobody's going to listen to this podcast. And then I watched it, and I was like, okay, we can at least make it entertaining talking about it. I hope we have, and I hope everybody's enjoyed it, and people join us, for the next episode. Because it's going to get a lot more interesting from here, folks. Like, there's a lot of cool things that happened in USWA in 1993. And like I say, if we can keep this podcast going, I eventually want to circle back to 92 someday. But there's a lot of great stuff that goes on in 93, and there's stuff that I really want to get to in 94, 95, and even 96. So we're here for the long haul, folks. So if you enjoyed the podcast, please let us know. If there's something you would like to see change or you'd like better, let us know. You can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/retro wrestling review. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you would like to see us do different or do better. Give us your opinions. Give us your thoughts on the show. Would you have gone and seen the show? Did you enjoy it? What did you think of the Dundee angle? And, of course, you can find this show and all sorts of great podcasts over at WrestleCopia.com. Go check out all the great podcasts that Ray Russell has over there. And there's more getting added daily. Dave Dynasty just recently joined the family over there. So a lot of good stuff coming up. And, of course, P3 Radio. Tell us a little bit about P3 Radio and where they can come hear you guys. I mean, you guys have been doing this for a long time. You just started doing this recently.
Yeah, man, we've been going strong since 2017. Back then, we started out as a predominantly wrestling associated podcast, and we would have other guests on too. But now we're kind of just comedy and just different news stuff, kind of poking fun at different things. But we're always, we welcome wrestlers to come on or whatever. Might have to try to get a few to promote this show. But either way, on Twitter, we're at P3 Radio, the number 1. On Facebook, search bar Pop Poncho, Poncho. You'll see our photograph. And you want to get with us the old school way, 731-300-6675.
Yep. And if you're looking for us on iTunes or anywhere you find your podcast, just remember it's P3 Radio, all one word, like it's in our descriptor right here. Right here. Yeah.
You'll get it.
Yeah, you'll get it.
Yes. Yes. Check out their show. It's a lot of fun. I've been on there a few times, and people who look and somewhat vaguely resemble me have been on there sometimes. And it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. These guys, like I say, they were top of my list to do this because I knew that not only are they knowledgeable at wrestling, but they're also fun and entertaining guys. And they're not afraid to give their opinions. They're not going to hold back, but they're also not going to just shit on anything for the sake. But they're going to be honest, and that's what we're here to do. We're just going to be honest. We're not here to, we're not knocking anything. I mean, we love this stuff, but this sometimes, man, it's a head scratcher. And just for me, on a show like that to close the night with back-to-back double disqualifications, I'm still just kind of dumbfounded, but we're going to see how they come back for it on the next episode. So join us to see where the USWA goes next from here. And we got a lot of fun stuff planned. We're working on getting some interviews together. We've had some USWA wrestlers from back in the day have already reached out and are showing interest in being involved. And something else we're looking at maybe doing at some point is maybe doing like some watch-alongs where we actually have the actual episode playing, and we'll talk over the actual episode if that's something you guys would be interested in seeing. Let us know. Like I said, this is primarily the audience for WrestleCopia's audio. So, we got to be able to do things that are good for audio, but, I have all the shows available over on my YouTube channel, so we can make that happen. So we're just here to have some fun and hopefully entertain and educate a little bit. Like I said, on the next moving forward, we're going to start digging a little deeper into some of these folks and telling you a little bit more about them. I didn't want to make this show last too long. So next week we're going to dig a little bit into who is Zeke Rivers. Where did this guy come from? Where do they find him? Who's Mr. Clyde? What other names does he wrestle as? Because spoiler alert, he wasn't always Mr. Clyde. He's had a couple other aliases too. We'll talk about Mike Samples and Lauren Davenport and Leslie Ballinger and all kinds of random USWA people who, if you're not an old school USWA fan, maybe you hadn't heard of these folks. We're going to tell you about them. Everybody else. So I want to thank my co-hosts, both Richard and Josh. You guys are awesome. You guys check out P3 Radio. It's a lot of fun. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Help us spread the word. Share it on Facebook, Twitter, X, whatever the hell it's called now. Get it out there for us. And we will see you on the very next episode of the Wrestling Review Podcast.